Hi, all our lovely podcast listeners. I'm Laura. The following audio story was produced by one of our 2021 young associates. Here at the Laura Flanders Show, we have a comprehensive internship associate program where participants get hands-on experience in everything from recording interviews to writing social media posts. Each of our staff members works with each intern associate. We mentor them in producing their own pieces and broadcast them here. You're about to hear one produced by high school student and Indigenous youth climate activist from Northern California, Maia Wiki. She's a 16-year-old descendant of the Yurok people from the Klamath River and the Porou and Aupōuri people of New Zealand. I met Maia when she was reporting on the Red Road to DC totem pole journey. I was impressed with her then, and I was impressed with her again when she joined a contingent of Indigenous youth activists to attend the COP26 climate summit in Glasgow. We asked her for a report, and this is what she brought us. Here's Maia's story of COP26. You can find information about our very robust internship associate program at our website. Thanks for making it possible with your contributions. Here's Maia.
Annie, do you remember when you came to us and you were really upset and crying and you were really worried?
Yes.
Do you remember what you were worried about?
I was worried because I was scared that the earth was just going to overheat and burn and then die.
Yeah, you were really worried about the planet getting too hot because we'd been talking about it a lot because Tamaya was going on a big trip. And do you remember what her big trip was about?
She was going to fly to Scotland and save the earth.
Right, and she was going to a big meeting where they were trying to save the earth. And when we told you that, what did you say? Do you remember?
I said, what about if Tamaya fails that meeting and she can't save the earth?
Right, you were worried.
That was a conversation between my mom and my little sister Annie. She's 7, and in the lead up to the United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26, she had questions about climate change. She convinced herself, though, that it was all going to be okay because I was going to COP26 to fix everything. But then she asked, what if I couldn't? In November, the world converged in Glasgow, Scotland for the most significant climate negotiations in living memory. Thousands of lobbyists, organizers, world leaders, concerned citizens, and celebrities came together for one single purpose: to save humanity. Or to save their individual versions of humanity on terms favorable to them. Buried in the depths of all of this is me, Maia Wiki, a 16-year-old Indigenous organizer descended from the Yurok people of Northern California and the Maori people of New Zealand. For 2 weeks, high diplomacy met grassroots activism. Agreements were drafted, positions were staked. We saw global leaders nod heads and shake hands. The global media hung on the words said and left unsaid. And at the end, we were told things have changed. But was that true? Did COP26 actually make any real difference for the future of our planet? And how do you measure change? Who determines what success is and how we've achieved it? Could I look at my sister and say, mission accomplished? So for Annie, I set out to find an answer. These global climate summits have been held annually for 26 years and most famously gave birth to the Paris Agreement in 2015, which aims to limit global temperatures from increasing more than 1.5 degrees Celsius. In these negotiations, countries update their national plans of how they will contribute to reducing global emissions. But what sets COP26 apart from any of the previous meetings is the sense of urgency. The human body's temperature in Celsius must be between 36.1 to 37.2 degrees. But if our bodies go 1 degree over, we have a fever. Right now, we're in a trajectory of an increased global temperature of 2.5 degrees. As my 7-year-old sister understands, the Earth has a fever, and if we don't make significant changes, we are all going to be very, very sick. It may seem simple that everyone agrees that the world is heating up and we should do something about it, but the hard part is that each country has a different idea about what they're prepared to do to lower the fever, and even a different idea about how much it should be lowered by. Is it 1.5? Is it 2 degrees? And the aha moment for me about why it's so difficult to measure success at COP is because it's not really a climate negotiation. Sure, the aim of the COP process is to lower the fever, But at its heart, COP is an economic negotiation, and that's because the only way countries will agree to take action is by creating or taking away economic incentives. Confounding this is inequity. The power to grant economic rewards isn't equally distributed. The most powerful countries are the ones who have already benefited from carbonization. In the United Nations structure, they're most often referred to as the Global North. North America, Europe, developed countries, and the demands that they mandate fall on the countries who can least afford the change, and remember this, are the most impacted by climate change. Underlying these inequities are the values driving decisions. For me, as an Indigenous young person, my cultural values include living in harmony and balance with the natural world. For both Māori people of New Zealand and the Yurok people of California's Klamath River, the well-being of my people is intrinsically tied to the well-being of Mother Earth. Our spiritual, physical, and mental well-being is only as healthy as the land itself. So I traveled from my home in Northern California to Glasgow, Scotland, holding the stories of my people's responsibility to care for the planet passed to me by my elders, and thinking of my little sister's worry. As a 16-year-old, would I actually be able to create any real change at this global summit? As soon as I landed in Glasgow, the exclusiveness was apparent in the COP26 structure. There were public events hosted independently and then other official United Nations spaces. One of those official spaces was the Green Zone, which had performances, presentations, panels, and other events hosted mostly by businesses or civil society, which are any non-governmental orgs. The most exclusive space was the Blue Zone, where the actual negotiations took place. The surrounding streets were blocked off and the venue was protected by a series of gates and security checkpoints. The whole process felt similar to an airport. Even inside, your access to different spaces depended on who you were affiliated with. But the most difficult part was obtaining a badge in the first place. Outside of my delegation, the majority of people I spent time with didn't have access at all. They flew from around the world, organizing in public spaces with the hopes of their messages impacting negotiations on the inside. A significant chunk of people from around the world couldn't come because of the United Kingdom's constantly changing red list, based on a daily change in a country's COVID case numbers and access to vaccines. It prevented people from coming because they lacked the resources to meet governmental requirements, like the funding for quarantining in a government-approved hotel. I had the chance to speak to Khadija Sheikh, a Muslim Indian woman who chooses to wear hijab. She traveled to COP26 with students from the University of Connecticut, where she's a sophomore studying environmental studies. On the second to last day of the summit, I asked her how she felt navigating the COP26 structure.
For me, I have done a lot of research in my classes, learning about the climate migrant crisis, especially in Bangladesh. And so that was something that I was like, I want to see this be addressed in COP, because I mean, this is happening everywhere now. Like, this is not something of like the future where like, oh, like maybe we'll become climate migrants. Like, no, like New York is already having like flash flooding, and we saw that and people freaked out, and yet still nothing is happening. So I wanted to see how that was going to be addressed at COP26, especially because we have countries that are being hard hit by climate migrant issues, like small island issues. Sorry. So I got here though, and I haven't seen that. And I went to a Green Zone event on Migrant Justice is Climate Justice, and I listened to a panel of speakers who didn't have badges to the Blue Zone, and they had done a lot of work, had a lot of organizations that they had established that were focusing on the migrant issue from all over the world in the global south. And they were speaking about how, like, yes, there was one event about climate migrants at all in the Blue Zone, but there was no discussion in the delegation room of making an actual statement, of making an actual commitment. And it was frustrating because, like, in the Paris Climate Accords, they just included like paragraph 51, and I just learned this. It was talking about how developed countries, those first world countries, or the global north, they did not have any, there was no like solid particular words that said like these countries need to pay for reparations, or these countries need to contribute more to decreasing their carbon emissions. Impacted nations, need you to pay up, need you to pay up, climate reparations.
hadn't spent a lot of time in the green zone, Khadijah reflected similar feelings I had while navigating the COP structure. Once I arrived, I understood how privileged I was because I had a blue zone pass for the entire length of the conference. I was only one of a few, and the impact of the exclusivity of this space is that the voices of the people most impacted by our global fever aren't present in the rooms where solutions are being developed. Government officials may be present to represent the economic interests of their countries, but who's raising concerns about values important to my people, like living in balance with the planet to ensure well-being for 7 generations, or ensuring the integrity of sacred land is maintained? The structure of the conference favors the powerful and excludes the voice of the people most impacted, or even worse, it pays lip service to our concerns. It was clear the Blue Zone, and even COP itself, wasn't intended or designed to be a safe space for Indigenous people or for anyone whose worldviews did not center in the Western developed world. For instance, I was a part of and witnessed interactions where policymakers took pictures of elders in regalia without permission. Why? Because they saw them as a novelty, not as people affected by the negotiations. In another instance, my delegation and I practiced smudging, where we burn a bit of sacred root and grass. We use the smoke to cleanse our spirit and take our prayers to the Creator. To us, this ritual is a normal part of how we set intentions and create harmony with our environment. To COP security, it was a fire risk and hazard to everyone else. If we continued, they threatened to evacuate the entire venue. With such a large chasm in understanding, how would it even be possible for our worldviews to be present in the negotiation rooms where there wasn't any understanding at all? In fact, our smudging and their response to that practice was so funny because we were actually trying to achieve the same thing: protect people's safety. In our worldview, the fire and smoke were tools for spiritual safety. In their worldview, those things were destructive and harmful. That was the worldview that prevailed inside the Blue Zone. To find out more about how other people experience this exclusion, I talked to Amit Teshwar Singh. He's a climate activist, a medical student, and chair of the COP26 National Working Group for Students for Global Health. One of his main aims was to advocate for health equity and figuring out how that intersects with the climate crisis, especially in vulnerable communities. I asked him about how he felt his issues were being addressed.
I think a lot of governments that we've spoken to so far, they of course say in favor to health. But the way they actually integrate that isn't as succinct as we need it to be. There's a lot of nodding heads, but not enough action, and they don't actually want to discuss the action points from the meetings that we've had with them. They just want to actually have the meeting, get it done with, and move on to the next point a lot of the time, which has been quite frustrating, quite frankly, and more so quite scary because, you know, it's a very dangerous scenario that we're looking at. That being said, I am seeing lots of mobilization going on outside of COP and even from a lot of advocates and activists inside COP, which I think has been really, really empowering. Lots of people that didn't know about health in the activist community are talking to me and learning about health, and I'm learning about their different sectors as well. And it's been like a two-way education that's been really, really interesting. The COP26 coalition has been doing amazing work as well. So they, I don't know if you know, but they've been organising the People Summit in Glasgow, which is like a alternative COP to try to challenge what COP is right now and make it a better version. And one of the things that we held as a part of that was a side event called the People's Health Hearing, and there we got to hear about basically testimonies from the Global South and from disparaged communities on how they've been impacted by health. And then people reflecting on those scenarios and talking about how they can mobilize through that. It was a really emotional day, quite frankly, a really powerful day. But as draining as it was really, really powerful. Like even walking into the venue every single day, I'm seeing protests outside, which I think is really what has kept me going, because it's just like, oh, this is what we're doing it for. It's not just on the paper and negotiations that are very dull a lot of the time, but it's actual action that we're doing it for.
Power to the people. People got the power. 'Cause the people got the power.
Similar to Amiteshwar, the interactions I had in COP's formal spaces could be discouraging, but the most encouraging moments for me were when the actual people most impacted by climate change could give voice to our people inside the negotiation spaces. A favorite moment for me was joining in action on one of the final days of the summit. organized by Pamela E.A. and Emiliana Rickenman with security liaison support of Greenpeace. The goal of this action was to ensure that the actual words fossil fuels were included and maintained in this version of the Paris Agreement. Using black Sharpies, we drew eyes on the palms of our hands to symbolize young people are always watching. Even if we can't physically be in the negotiation rooms, our energy is always present. We held up our hands, marched closer to the negotiation rooms, and began chanting. And much like Amiteshwar, I remember thinking, okay, this is why I'm here. Much like the story of the smudging situation, interactions, big or small, where young people of color are sharing their worldviews with decision makers, are important because they brought attention to a world that was unfamiliar and out of sight for many people inside of the Blue Zone. A march of 100,000 people is important to draw attention on a large scale, but explaining to a security guard or an elected official my spiritual practices or worldviews is just as important in changing hearts and minds. Building connections with other people opens several dialogues, which allows for direct, actionable steps to continue shifting the narratives surrounding climate change and centering BIPOC voices. One example of this was on the last day of this summit when I went to the People's Plenary, the final gathering of civil society before the end of the conference. I had the honor of standing in solidarity with Indigenous allies as Takaya Blaney addressed the room of hundreds of people, calling out the hypocrisy of the Canadian government, the leaders organizing COP26, and extractive corporations.
COP26 is a performance. It's an illusion constructed to salvage capitalist economies rooted in resource extraction and colonialism. I didn't come here to fix the agenda, I came here to disrupt it.
After, we closed their speech with a song, and Indigenous people led a march out of the Blue Zone with hundreds of people following behind us. And as I looked around, I realized how many real relationships I had formed with young activists and First Peoples from around the globe. As we navigated COP26 together, we led with our cultural values and our shared spiritual connection to the land, water, plants, and animals. And I thought, I'll have to tell Ani I wasn't here fighting alone. I made so many new friends, strong people who share our values and are fighting to save the planet with us. And it was so affirming, like, this is what I came to do. These are my people. And also, we burned medicine on our way out. In the end, no matter what mainstream media declares a win or a loss, I can tell my sister I helped make meaningful change at COP26. In order for people like me, youth and disenfranchised voices, to consider COP26 a success, we needed two things to happen. One, for our voices to be so loud it would be impossible to ignore within the negotiations. And two, to ensure the movement, networks, and power we built at COP continue afterwards to hold world leaders accountable not only to what they said they would do, but to us, the everyday people who are suffering because climate change has meant the loss of our homes, traditional food sources, sacred places, and clean water. There's still significant changes that need to be made. This space needs to be more accessible for non-English speaking people, non-able-bodied people, and for all of those whose lives are put at the expense of colonial policies. We're in a process, but for me, COP26 was a success. Success includes the words fossil fuels staying in the actual language of the agreement. They kept it in the text. Success for me was the uprising of youth who agitated for change in the streets of Glasgow. Success was learning about how my allies are fighting for justice. Success was sharing stories about the ceremonies my people have had since time immemorial to maintain physical and spiritual balance between all things. Success was having the energy of youth, people of color, climate migrants, small island nations, and all impacted communities be present. And success didn't end the day of the conference. We nurtured, sustained, and grew the voices of the ordinary people present to continue the work and fight. Because the real work happens between COPs. We're already organizing for COP27 and making sure the people who promised, who gave flowery speeches and media appearances, actually do what they said they would do. And we can't sleep. Leaders come and go, policies change, but people of color, Indigenous people, the disenfranchised, we persist. And we resist. COP26 was a success because the most impacted people came together to ensure the movement continues and doesn't fade away. Annie, when you listen to this one day, I hope you know I did my best to make sure the voices of our people in the redwood forests and the whale riders of New Zealand, that our voices were present. We shouted, we educated, we learned, and did all that we could because I don't want you worrying about Papa Tuanuku, Mother Earth, having a fever for the rest of your life.